Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today we're going back to the early 70s
Okay.
to one of America's most, uh, I guess, infamous murder mysteries.
Right.
It's the Jeffrey MacDonald case.
Yeah.
And, we've got a stack of sources here. Court transcripts, investigative reports, even personal accounts
Yeah, wow.
that offer a glimpse into, this tangled web of
Yeah.
evidence, conflicting narratives,
Yeah.
and questions that just won't seem to go away.
I think what's really fascinating about this case and why it gripped the nation the way that it did is you have a backdrop of, Vietnam.
Right.
The Manson murders had just happened.
Yep.
And all of a sudden you have this crime that takes place on a military base,
Right.
which you would think is a safe place.
A very controlled environment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it really, I think it tapped into people's fears at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's set the scene here.
Okay.
It's February 17th, 1970, Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Great.
Army MPs respond to a frantic call from Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald, a Green Beret surgeon.
Yeah.
They arrive at his home.
Yeah.
And what they find is like something out of a nightmare.
It's really horrific.
Yeah.
MacDonald's wife, Colette, who was pregnant at the time,
Oh, wow.
was found brutally murdered in their bedroom.
Oh, my gosh.
She'd been stabbed multiple times, beaten with a blunt object.
Oh, my goodness.
And to make matters worse,
Yeah.
the word pig was written in blood on the headboard.
Oh, gosh. So that instantly makes you think of the Manson family murders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just a year earlier. So
Mhm.
very chilling detail.
Absolutely. And then there were the children, 5-year-old Kimberly
Right.
and 2-year-old Kristen.
Yeah.
They were found dead in their bedrooms,
Mm-hmm.
both of them victims of multiple stab wounds.
Yeah. It's just a level of violence that's really hard to comprehend.
It is, and in the middle of all this, you have Jeffrey MacDonald,
Right.
the sole survivor,
Yeah.
lying wounded but alive
Yeah.
next to his wife's body.
Right next to his wife's body.
He had punctured lung, a few superficial cuts. But his injuries seemed relatively minor compared to the violence inflicted on his family.
Right, and that immediately raises questions.
For sure. So what was his explanation for this horrific night?
So MacDonald claimed that he had been attacked in his sleep
Okay.
by a group of intruders, 4 hippies, he said 2 men and 2 women,
Okay.
who broke into his home
Hmm.
and went on this murderous rampage.
Wow.
He even claimed to hear one of them chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs."
Oh, my gosh.
And he described this chaotic struggle, fighting for his life, trying to protect his family.
Well, that seems to really play into all the fears and anxieties of that era.
Exactly.
You got the Manson family, the anti-war movement, the rise of drug culture.
It was a very chaotic time.
It was a very chaotic time.
Yeah.
So did investigators buy MacDonald's story?
Initially, maybe,
Okay.
but as they started to dig into the evidence,
Yeah.
doubt started to surface.
Oh.
The lead investigator for the Army, Bill Ivory, was particularly skeptical.
Interesting.
There were just too many things that didn't add up.
Like what?
Well, for one, there were no signs of forced entry.
Oh, really?
The house was relatively undisturbed. There was really no evidence of a struggle beyond the master bedroom.
That is strange that a group of intruders would be able to enter our home, commit these horrific acts,
Right.
and then just leave without a trace.
It doesn't really make sense.
No, it doesn't. Were there any other red flags?
Yeah, one of the most glaring things was the placement of the murder weapons.
Okay.
An ice pick and a knife, presumably used in the attacks,
Right.
were found neatly placed near Colette's body.
It seems staged.
Right.
It's
It was almost too perfect.
too perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about the blood trail analysis you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, that really painted a different picture of what might have happened.
Okay, so break it down for us.
Okay.
Blood trail analysis sounds very CSI.
Yeah, so bloodstain pattern analysis, or blood spatter as it's often called,
Okay.
is a forensic technique used to reconstruct the sequence of events at a crime scene. Basically, by examining the shape, the size, and the distribution of bloodstains, investigators can determine things like the angle of impact,
Right.
the type of weapon used, and the movements of the victim and the assailant.
So in this case, the bloodstains told a story that didn't match MacDonald's version of events.
Exactly.
So what did the blood tell the investigators?
Well, one thing was the blood patterns on MacDonald's pajamas and on the bed linens
Mm-hmm.
suggested that he had been standing upright when his wife was being attacked.
Oh,
And that contradicted his claim that he was lying in bed next to her during the struggle.
that's a pretty big discrepancy.
Yeah, and something that would be very hard to fake.
Right?
And there's more. The bloodstains also indicated that Colette had been stabbed while lying on the bed,
Okay.
and that the attack continued as she tried to defend herself,
Oh, wow.
which again contradicted MacDonald's claim that she had been attacked while standing up.
So the blood evidence was telling a totally different story
Right.
than the one MacDonald was presenting. Were there any other pieces of physical evidence that contradicted his claims?
Well, you remember that chilling inscription on the headboard, the word pig?
Oh, yeah, written in blood.
Yeah, well, investigators found an issue of Esquire magazine in the house
Okay.
with an article about the Manson family murders.
Oh, wow.
And the same word was prominently displayed in that article.
Oh, my gosh.
So it seemed a little too coincidental,
It does, yeah.
especially given MacDonald's claims of a hippie intruder chanting about killing pigs.
Right. You have to wonder if he was drawing inspiration from the Manson case.
It's a possibility, but there wasn't any concrete evidence to suggest that he was obsessed
Right.
with the Manson murders or any other high-profile crimes.
But the presence of the magazine is definitely suspicious.
It raises eyebrows for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it does make you think, was this a deliberate attempt to mislead investigators?
Right.
To kind of create a narrative that played into the fears of that time?
It's possible.
Yeah. And, this is the early 70s. We're long before DNA testing.
Yeah.
And other advanced forensic techniques.
Things were much different back then.
So investigators had to rely a lot on eyewitness accounts,
Right.
physical evidence,
Mhm.
and their gut instinct.
Exactly.
So with all these inconsistencies
Yeah.
and this blood evidence contradicting his story, what happened next?
Well,
Did the Army take action?
this is where things get a little more complicated.
Okay.
So despite their suspicions, the Army ultimately decided not to court-martial MacDonald.
Really?
Yeah, they cited a lack of sufficient evidence to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
I bet that was a major setback for the investigators.
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially for Bill Ivory. He seemed pretty convinced of MacDonald's involvement.
I can imagine. So what was the reasoning behind the Army's decision?
Well, there was definitely some pressure from within the military community
Okay.
to protect one of their own.
Okay.
He was a decorated Green Beret surgeon, after all,
Right.
and there were concerns about the strength of the evidence and the possibility of a public backlash
Oh, yeah.
if the case went to trial and MacDonald was acquitted.
Wow. So despite the mounting suspicions and the holes in his story,
Yeah,
MacDonald was essentially a free man.
that's right.
But I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a very long and winding road to justice.
You're absolutely right. This is where the case takes a really fascinating turn.
Okay, let's get into it then.
All right. While the Army might have been done with the MacDonald case, there was one person who wasn't ready to let it go.
Oh, really?
Colette's stepfather, Freddie Kassab.
This is where you see the personal tragedy
Right.
really intersect with this pursuit of justice.
Yeah.
Tell me about Kassab. What drove him to pick up the investigation where the Army left off?
Well, Kassab was a former FBI agent,
Okay.
and he was suspicious of MacDonald right from the beginning. He couldn't reconcile this image of this clean-cut, all-American doctor with such a brutal crime.
Right.
So when the Army decided not to prosecute,
Yep.
Kassab took it personally.
I can imagine.
He felt like it was a betrayal of his daughter's memory,
Yeah.
and he vowed to uncover the truth no matter what.
It sounds like he launched his own investigation.
He did.
Did he have any experience in criminal investigation beyond his time with the FBI?
Well, he certainly had the drive and the determination,
Yeah.
but he did need help.
Okay.
So he teamed up with Peter Carnes,
Okay.
a former Army CID investigator who had also worked on the MacDonald case.
Interesting.
And Carnes had also been troubled by the Army's decision to
Oh.
drop the charges.
Mm-hmm.
He shared Kassab's belief that MacDonald was guilty.
So you've got this unlikely duo,
Yeah,
a grieving father,
right.
and this seasoned investigator,
Exactly.
both with this nagging feeling that something just wasn't right.
Yeah.
What did their investigation uncover? Did they find anything that the Army missed?
Well, Kassab and Carnes were very thorough.
Okay.
They re-examined all the evidence,
Yeah.
pored over the crime scene photos,
Yeah.
interviewed witnesses, and they actually did discover a series of inconsistencies and missed opportunities
Oh, really?
that raised some serious questions.
Like what kind of inconsistency?
Well, one of the main things they focused on was the physical evidence.
Okay.
For example, MacDonald's pajama top, which
Mhm.
was a key piece of evidence.
There you
I
go.
got a bunch of rips and tears in it,
Right.
which MacDonald said were caused by the intruders during the struggle.
Okay.
But Kassab and Carnes argued that those tears were inconsistent with MacDonald's description of the attack.
So they were suggesting that he staged the scene,
Exactly.
that he damaged his own pajama top
Yeah.
to make it look like there had been a fight.
Right. And that wasn't the only thing.
What else?
They also pointed out discrepancies in the way that the murder weapons were found.
Okay.
They questioned why MacDonald, who was a doctor,
Right.
hadn't done more to try to save his family.
Well, that's a good point.
They even questioned his demeanor
Oh, wow.
in the aftermath of the attacks, saying that he seemed too calm, too collected
Interesting.
for someone who had just experienced this horrific event.
It's really incredible that a fresh set of eyes,
Yeah.
especially driven by such a personal stake in the case,
Right.
could uncover these details that maybe the original investigators had overlooked.
It really makes you wonder.
It does, yeah. So did their findings lead to any new legal action?
Well, Kassab and Carnes wouldn't give up. They took their findings to the authorities and pushed for the case to be reopened.
Wow.
And eventually their efforts did pay off.
Oh, really?
In 1974, 4 years after the murders,
Okay.
a federal grand jury was convened to review the evidence.
That's a big win for Kassab and Carnes.
Yeah, it really shows the power of persistence.
Yeah.
And, never giving up on the truth.
What was the outcome of the grand jury investigation?
Well, the grand jury heard testimony from witnesses,
Okay.
reviewed all the evidence,
Yeah.
and they ultimately decided to indict MacDonald on
Okay.
3 counts of murder.
So it was going to trial.
It was a huge turning point.
Yeah.
I mean, it meant that finally MacDonald was going to have to face a trial for
Right.
these crimes.
It took the dedication of this grieving father and a really determined investigator to
Yeah.
get it to that point.
Yeah, they wouldn't let it go.
They didn't. What happened next?
So the trial began in 1979,
Okay.
almost a decade after the murders.
Wow.
And it was a huge media event.
I can imagine.
The nation was captivated
Right.
by this case.
Mhm.
The prosecution was led by Jim Blackburn and Brian Murtaugh,
Okay.
and they presented a really compelling case,
Okay.
focusing on the physical evidence
Yeah.
and the inconsistencies in MacDonald's story.
Right.
They argued that the crime scene was staged
Right.
and that MacDonald's injuries were self-inflicted.
Wow. So it sounds like the prosecution had a pretty strong case.
They did.
Did they have any key pieces of evidence or anything that really stood out as proof of his guilt?
One of the most damning pieces of evidence was that bloodstain pattern analysis. They brought in an expert
Okay.
who testified that the blood patterns just couldn't have been created the way that MacDonald described.
Wow. So that must have been a big blow to the defense.
It was.
What was their strategy? How did they defend him?
Well, the defense definitely had a tough job ahead of them,
Yeah.
but they argued that the prosecution's case was circumstantial,
Okay.
that there was no direct evidence
Yeah.
linking MacDonald to the murders.
Okay.
They tried to paint a picture of him
Yeah.
as this loving husband and father, a decorated war hero
Right.
who was wrongly accused.
So kind of attacking the prosecution's case as flimsy,
Yeah,
highlighting the lack of a clear motive,
right.
and playing on the jury's emotions.
Exactly.
Did it work?
Well, they did their best.
Yeah.
But the prosecution had built a pretty strong case.
Right.
They were very thorough.
Yeah.
So were there any surprises during the trial? Any unexpected twists? There was one witness
Okay.
who really shook things up.
Oh, who was that?
Helena Stokely.
Felna Stokely. Yeah, that name sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Tell me about her. What was her involvement in the case?
So Stokely was a young woman
Oh,
who claimed to have been at the MacDonald house
really?
on the night of the murders.
Oh, wow.
She was a drug addict who had been in trouble with the law.
Okay.
And initially, she actually gave statements that supported MacDonald's story.
Really?
Yeah.
So she was backing him up.
Yeah, she claimed she had seen a group of hippies near MacDonald's house the night of the murders.
Interesting.
So it seemed like she could be a key witness for the defense.
Right.
But then during the trial,
Yeah.
her testimony took a dramatic turn.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she recanted her previous statements.
Wow.
She said she'd been pressured by the defense
Oh,
to lie.
really?
And then she went on to describe a completely different scenario,
Oh, my gosh.
one that put MacDonald at the center of the crime.
Wow, what a twist. What does Stokely claim she saw that night?
Well, her testimony got a little confusing,
Okay.
and it was often contradictory.
Okay.
She said she saw MacDonald arguing with Colette,
Mm-hmm.
and then she saw him fly into a rage.
Oh, my gosh.
She described a chaotic scene,
Okay.
but her details were really vague
Right.
and honestly unreliable.
This must have thrown a wrench in both the prosecution and the defense's plans.
It totally changed the game.
How did they respond?
Well, the prosecution, of course, saw this as a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
They portrayed Stokely as this credible witness
Okay.
who had finally come clean.
Right.
They said that her testimony, along with all the other evidence,
Yeah.
proved that MacDonald was the killer.
Okay.
The defense, on the other hand,
Yeah.
tried to discredit Stokely.
Right.
They pointed out her history of drug abuse
Mhm.
and her mental instability.
Right.
They said she was unreliable
Right.
and that the prosecution had manipulated her.
Wow. So it became a battle of credibility, trying to convince the jury who to believe.
Yeah, who was telling the truth?
Right. A decorated Green Beret doctor or this young woman with a history of addiction.
Right, and you have to remember, this was a time when public perception of drug addicts and those with mental health issues was very different than it is today.
It was.
So it was a lot easier
Yeah.
to paint Stokely
Right.
as an unreliable witness.
So with all this drama and conflicting testimony, what happened? Did the jury believe Stokely or did they side with MacDonald? I bet that was a tense moment in the courtroom,
It was.
waiting for that verdict.
Yeah.
After weeks of testimony, all this evidence and these conflicting stories,
Yeah.
what did the jury decide?
Well, they deliberated for 6.5 hours
Wow.
before reaching a verdict.
Okay.
And they found Jeffrey MacDonald guilty on all 3 counts of murder.
Guilty on all counts. So it seems like the weight of the evidence,
Yeah.
the bloodstain patterns, the inconsistencies in his story, and maybe even Stokely's testimony was enough to convince them.
I think it all played a role.
What was MacDonald's reaction?
Well, he had maintained his innocence throughout the trial
Right.
and even after the verdict.
Because he was still saying he didn't do it.
Oh, yeah, he was visibly shocked and distraught,
I bet.
just vehemently denying any involvement in the murders.
Wow. So what happened then?
Well, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms.
Wow.
A pretty devastating outcome for a man who had once been, a respected surgeon and a decorated Green Beret.
Yeah, what a fall from grace.
It really is a tragic story.
It is. But even with a guilty verdict and a life sentence, the story doesn't end there, does it?
Not at all.
The Jeffrey MacDonald case just seems to linger in the public consciousness.
It does.
It sparks debates, it raises questions.
Yeah, people are still talking about it today.
They are. So what happened in the years after the trial?
Well, the case became kind of a legal maze
Okay.
with all these appeals, new evidence, and claims of prosecutorial misconduct.
It sounds like the case itself mirrored the chaotic crime scene.
You could say that.
Just a mess of evidence and interpretations.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
So what were some of the key developments? Did anything come up that cast doubt on the verdict or supported MacDonald's claims of innocence?
Well, in the 80s,
Okay.
there was some new evidence discovered.
Okay.
A blonde wig hair
Oh, wow.
and some blue fibers
Interesting.
that were found at the crime scene,
Okay.
but they didn't match anyone in the MacDonald household.
So was this the evidence that MacDonald's team needed?
Well, they hoped so,
Yeah.
but the evidence was inconclusive.
Oh.
Testing back then wasn't what it is today.
Right.
They couldn't definitively link the fibers or the hair to anyone involved in the case.
And Stokely's descriptions were always a little iffy.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's hard to know if they matched what she had said.
Right.
Did this new evidence lead to any further legal action?
Not really. I
Um,
mean, it wasn't enough to overturn the verdict,
Right.
but it did give more fuel to the people who believe MacDonald is innocent.
I can see that.
One of the most outspoken people who believes that is Ted Gunderson.
Ted Gunderson. Oh, yeah. He's a big name in the conspiracy theory world.
Yeah, he's known for that.
So what was his take on the MacDonald case?
Well, he believed that the murders were committed by a satanic cult
Oh, wow.
and that MacDonald was framed
Okay.
to protect the people who were really involved.
Interesting.
He pointed to that blonde wig hair and the blue fibers
Right.
as evidence of a larger conspiracy.
So this seems like this case has attracted a lot of conspiracy theories over the years.
It has. It's one of those cases that people love to speculate about.
Right. Did Gunderson's involvement have any impact on the legal proceedings, though?
Not really. The courts dismissed his claims
Okay.
as lacking any real evidence,
Right.
but his theories definitely contributed to the public debate
I bet.
and kept that idea alive
Yeah.
that maybe MacDonald was innocent.
So even with the guilty verdict, the life sentence, the questions lingered.
Yeah, they're still there.
MacDonald says he's innocent. There are inconsistencies in the evidence, and forensic technology has come a long way since then.
It's a case that keeps people thinking.
It does. Were there any other significant developments or legal challenges?
Well, in 2005,
Okay.
MacDonald had his first parole hearing.
Oh, wow. So he had the chance to plead his case?
Yeah.
To present any new evidence?
Mm-hmm.
To speak directly to the parole board?
Exactly.
After decades behind bars,
Ugh.
still saying he was innocent? That must have been a really intense experience.
It was a very emotional hearing.
So what happened? Did they grant him parole?
They did not.
Okay, why not?
Well, they cited the brutality of the crimes,
Right.
the lack of remorse that MacDonald had shown,
Right.
and the fact that they considered him a danger to the community
I see.
if he was released.
The Colette's family probably fought against his release, too.
Oh, yeah. They were very vocal
Yeah.
in their opposition to his parole.
So that must have been another devastating blow for MacDonald,
It was.
to be denied parole after all those years.
Right.
But did that mark the end of his legal battles?
Well, not quite.
Okay.
In 2006, a federal court agreed to hear near evidence
Really? From who?
from a retired U.S. Marshal named Jim Britt.
Okay.
And Britt claimed that Helena Stokely...
The key witness.
Yeah,
Who changed her story.
exactly.
Okay.
Britt said that she had been threatened by the prosecution
Wow.
to keep quiet.
Wow. If that's true, that could totally change everything.
It could.
So what did the court do?
Well, the court said that Britt's allegations were serious,
Yeah.
and they agreed that if this information had come out during the trial,
Right.
it might have changed the outcome.
Wow.
But they ultimately decided not to grant a new trial.
Oh, wow. Another setback for MacDonald.
It was.
So it seems like every time there's a chance for his case to be re-examined, something happens and the door closes.
Yeah, it's been a long and frustrating road for him and his supporters.
Did this mark the end of his legal options?
Well, MacDonald's lawyers haven't given up.
Okay.
They've continued to file appeals and motions, exploring every legal avenue. He even applied for compassionate release in 2020.
Really?
Because of health issues.
Oh, wow.
But his requests were denied.
So the Jeffrey MacDonald case is still unresolved.
It is.
It's this tangled web of unanswered questions and lingering doubts.
Exactly. And it's a case that really forces us to think about, the limits of what we can know.
Right.
The power of memory and perception.
Mm-hmm.
We may never know for sure what happened that night in 1970.
That's true.
But it's a reminder
Right.
that even in seemingly perfect places, bad things can happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes the truth remains elusive.
It's a chilling thought.
It is.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Jeffrey MacDonald case.
It's been a fascinating one.
It has. We encourage you to check out the books, the documentaries, the articles.
Yeah, there's so much out there.
There's tons of information about this case. Form your own opinions, weigh the evidence. Maybe you'll come a little closer to solving this mystery.
You never know.
You never know. All right, until next time, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.